SETI's results for 2018 proves our effectiveness as a development partner, placing people at the center of our work and leveraging partnerships and cooperation to transform policy imperatives into action. With an eye on the rapidly changing global context, SETI is innovating to constructively address the emerging challenges and opportunities for the region. As part of our competitiveness program, SETI is designing precise tools to assess assets and capabilities in the productive sector to determine paths towards higher value goods and services. As our flagship program for partnerships, the Americas Competitiveness Exchange on Innovation and Entrepreneurship, the OAS, will continue to leverage good practices and the power of networks to increase trade and investment in the region.
For us, the role of the OAS is very important, connecting countries, connecting governments and private sector, and letting us know what other countries are doing it and how we can replicate that in our countries to enhance development.
For me, who has come here to look at how can we develop our own ecosystem, our own innovation hubs, our own accelerators, I think seeing this, touching, feeling, seeing the transformation, seeing how quickly you've made it happen is a testament to what is possible. So I believe all of us leave here stronger than ever.
The Working Group of Experts on Subnational Competitiveness, the GTEX, is our gateway program to promote local economic competitiveness policies alongside municipal and state-level governments, together with the private sector and academia.
Este tipo de reuniones te sirven para darte cuenta de todo lo que se está viviendo en América Latina sobre los temas de competitividad. Y hoy justamente en este sector estamos viendo sobre todo los temas de innovación tecnológica, pues que si hablamos de competitividad tenemos que hablar de tecnología. Y me está ayudando mucho para abrir el panorama de ver lo que están haciendo otras ciudades y lo que podemos llegar a aplicar también nosotros en México.
The hub on the transfer and commercialization of technology is connecting and strengthening national innovation ecosystems in the region. Each edition of the hub trains budding technology entrepreneurs from the region's public and private sectors to take promising products and services from idea to market.
Porque es importante que estemos juntos en esto, porque la región tiene que estar unida y me parece que hay mucho conocimiento en la región que todavía no está explotado comercialmente como podría ser, y esta es la mejor manera de hacerlo.
Tenemos la proyección de cada año generar y compartir nuevas experiencias entre aquellos que contribuyen a la innovación. Queremos cambiar el cómo lo hemos estado haciendo en Latinoamérica. Queremos generar la unión de los países, queremos colaborar.
Our virtual platform on technology foresight, Prospecta Americas, will support OAS member states in identifying and mapping future trends and technological development of critical importance for the Americas.
Este esfuerzo, el cual viene siendo apoyado por la Organización de los Estados Americanos, nos permitirá tener una gran información para poder mapear estas iniciativas de innovación y poder que ellas contribuyan al crecimiento económico, a la competitividad y al bienestar de nuestras naciones.
Como bien sabemos, nos encontramos ya en la cuarta revolución industrial, la que está cambiando rápidamente la forma en que se hace negocios, se produce, se consume y se genera bienestar y entretenimiento en el mundo. Es la mayor amenaza, tal vez la mejor oportunidad que tenemos en nuestras naciones.
The Inter-American Teacher Education Network, the I-10, is working to improve the quality of teachers with an emphasis on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education. In 2019, the I-10 launched the first STEM Teacher Fellowship of the Americas. The Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas, ECPA, is working with governments in the Caribbean to advance electric mobility and clean transport as the sub-region pursues energy independence. Under our Integrated Water Resources Management Program, SETI is responding to the demand of member states for platforms and applications that enable data-driven policies. In the Central American region, for example, we are expanding the scope of Costa Rica's Plataforma Interactiva de Aplicación del Clima Tropical. This tool captures and disseminates real-time climate and water data, promoting resilient agriculture. The Inter-American Committee on Ports is building human and institutional capacity through public-private partnerships to address port modernization, logistics, and security. CooperaNet, SETI's multi-stakeholder platform for cooperation and partnerships, is being relaunched in 2019, responding to member states' call for a more robust hub for cooperation. In a region where 8 out of 10 consumers begin or end their shopping process online, SETI has entered into a partnership with the private sector.
Es una herramienta que sin duda acerca a las MIPYMES hacia la demanda que hoy está migrando a Internet, y con eso pretendemos mejorar las ventas y el posicionamiento de las empresas pequeñas.
As we look to the future, the Executive Secretariat for Integral Development will continue to leverage cooperation and partnerships to expand our reach, proving that together we are much more than the sum of our 34 member states.
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se trabajó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno y lo dieron todo lo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona de adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children and they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
more than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education.
We have the following delegations: Antigua and Barbuda. Argentina didn't do the tests, although they put a note on the board saying that they're present. Barbados, Belize, Bolivia, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Dominica, El Salvador, the United States, Grenada, Guatemala, Guyana, Honduras, Jamaica, Mexico, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, the Dominican Republic, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, and Venezuela. We have quorum, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ASG. Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues. I have the honor to declare open this special meeting of the Permanent Council, pursuant to Article 14 of the Statutes of the Permanent Council and Article 37 of its Rules of Procedure. The meeting was convened at the request of the permanent missions of Antigua and Barbuda and Guatemala, with the support of the permanent missions of the Bahamas, Colombia, Grenada, Guyana, Haiti, Jamaica, Peru, Trinidad and Tobago, the United States, and Uruguay, with a view to considering the draft resolution, The Crisis in Ukraine, as contained in document CP Doc 5763/22, Rev. 2. Before proceeding to the adoption of the order of business, I wish to take this opportunity to express our condolences to the delegation of the United States and to the government and people of that member state on the death of Mrs. Madeleine Albright, first woman to serve as Secretary of State from January 23, 1997 to January 20th, 2001. Former Secretary Albright's passing is an immense loss to the world at a time when we most need the lessons of her life. May she rest in peace. We now proceed to the adoption of the draft order of business. In accordance with Article 43 of the Rules of Procedure of the Permanent Council, we will proceed to adopt the order of business for this meeting, document CP-OD 237122. I note that the Ambassador of Antigua and Barbuda, Sir Ronald Sanders, has requested the floor. Excellency, the floor is yours.
He said it was unintentional.
Yes.
Thank you, Excellency. There being no
Excuse me,
observation.
Madam Chair, you have other requests for the floor? Ambassador of Guatemala.
Please excuse me. Ambassador Descioli, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any further requests for the floor at this point? We shall proceed. There being no observations, the order of business is hereby approved. Approved. We shall now proceed to the second item on the order of business and consider the draft resolution, the crisis in Ukraine, as contained in document CP-Doc 5763/21, Rev 2, presented by the permanent missions of Antigua and Barbuda and Guatemala, with the co-sponsorship of the permanent missions of the Bahamas, Colombia, Grenada, Guyana, Haiti, Jamaica, Peru, Trinidad and Tobago, the United States, and Uruguay. In this regard, I would like to first offer the floor to Ambassador Sir Ronald Sanders, Permanent Representative of Antigua and Barbuda, to present the draft resolution. Ambassador Sanders, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, all of our countries are living now in a deeply troubling time. As we gather at this important meeting of the Permanent Council, the international legal order is fighting for its life. Peace and security in the world, and indeed peace and security in our hemisphere, has been dependent on respect for international law and the principles of the United Nations Charter and the OAS Charter, both of which require suppression of acts of aggression and conformity with the principles of justice and international law. peace and security are now gravely threatened, destabilizing the world economy and the economies of every country on the planet with no exception. These conditions have quickly impacted every person in the world, and more particularly the poorest, the powerless, and the least resilient. High prices for oil, shortages of food supplies, increased costs of food, of air and sea transportation, higher costs for the supply of water and energy. All of these developments have touched every person in all of our societies, especially the poor and vulnerable. Madam Chair, our societies are at serious risk of destabilization. The crisis in Ukraine, caused by the aggression of the Russian Federation, has not spared any of our nations. Therefore, Madam Chair, every member state of this Organization of American States has to be deeply concerned for themselves and for world peace and security. Unquestionably, each of our countries is also deeply disturbed that the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine has been violated. Small countries such as mine are especially troubled because we are militarily and economically powerless. The only defense we have is respect for and adherence to international law. When international law is violated, our defenses are breached and we are exposed to aggression in all its forms that we have little capacity to resist. Events in Ukraine have unfolded before our eyes. No one can deny the loss of life and the displacement of millions of people. None can refute that innocent women and children, including babies, have been the hapless victims of military action in densely populated cities. No country can turn a blind eye to the dire humanitarian crisis which is worsening even now as we gather in this Permanent Council. Over the last 3 weeks and up to yesterday, the overwhelming majority of our member states have twice voted in the United Nations General Assembly to express condemnation of all violations of international law, including international humanitarian law. However, our own organization, this OAS, is yet to make a collective statement on this matter, even though Ukraine and the Russian Federation are both permanent observers to the OAS and sit amongst us. This is why the delegations of Guatemala and Antigua and Barbuda, with the support of several other member states, have brought this important resolution to the Permanent Council. We thank the member states that have co-sponsored this resolution and the overwhelming majority of delegations that have pledged their support. We want an end to this military assault in Ukraine. We want a return to international law. We want the humanitarian situation in Ukraine to be addressed and to end the suffering of its people. We want dialogue and negotiations to end the hostilities and to restore peace. And we want all our member states and permanent observers to honor their responsibilities to the principles and values set forth in the OAS Charter. Madam Chair, in this connection, Antigua and Barbuda moves that we submit this resolution brought before you by the delegations of Antigua and Barbuda and Guatemala, with the support of a number of our friends, we would like to submit this resolution to a vote, and we now formally do so. I respectfully request a roll call vote in accordance with Article 58 of the Rules of Procedure of this body. Madam Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency. The Ambassador of Antigua has called for a vote. I note the list of requests to speak, and I respectfully remind that the order of speaking is permanent representatives to be followed by permanent observers. In that regard, I'm pleased to hear Ambassador Rita De Scioli, a proponent of the draft resolution. Ambassador, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. As a proponent country of this resolution, alongside Antigua and Barbuda and Ambassador Sanders, we would like to put this draft resolution to a vote. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
Ambassador, considering the request made by Antigua and Barbuda, seconded by Guatemala, we shall proceed to a vote to see whether the delegations do or do not approve the draft resolution being considered by the Permanent Council. The Chair wishes to remind that once the voting has begun, no representative may interrupt it, except for a point of order relating to the way it is being conducted. In accordance with Article 57, the decisions of the Permanent Council shall be taken by the vote of an absolute majority of its members. The Chair also reminds that under Article 58, voting will be done by roll call, and the vote of the representative shall be cast in favor, in opposition, or in abstention. I now ask, do you approve the draft resolution under consideration? We shall take a roll call vote, beginning with Colombia. Assistant Secretary General, please be so kind as to call the representatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We will now begin the roll call vote as instructed by the Chair, starting with the delegation of Colombia.
The delegation of Colombia, please. Colombia, how do you vote? In favor? Thank you very much, Ambassador. The delegation of Costa Rica. How do you vote? Costa Rica votes in favor. Thank you very much, Ambassador. The delegation of Dominica.
The Commonwealth of Dominica votes in favor.
Thank you, Ms. Judy. La delegación de Ecuador.
The delegation of Ecuador, how do you vote? Ecuador votes in favor. Thank you very much, Ambassador. The delegation of El Salvador, how do you vote? Abstention. Thank you very much, Ambassador.
Vote.
The United States votes in favor.
Thank you, Mr. Frieden. The delegation of Grenada, how do you vote?
Grenada votes in favor.
Thank you, Ambassador. La delegación de Guatemala.
The delegation of Guatemala, how do you vote? Guatemala votes in favor. Thank you very much, Ambassador.
How do you vote?
Ambassador, could you please request the floor?
The delegation of Guyana votes in favor.
Thank you, Ambassador.
The delegation of Haiti votes in favor. The delegation of Honduras. Honduras, how do you vote? Honduras abstains. Thank you very much, Ambassador.
Vote.
Jamaica votes in favor.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. La delegación de México.
The delegation of Mexico, how do you vote? The delegation of Mexico votes in favor. Thank you very much, Ambassador. The delegation of Nicaragua, how do you vote? Would you kindly check to see if Nicaragua is connected? Nicaragua is absent. The delegation of Panama. Panama, how do you vote? The delegation of Panama votes in favor. Thank you very much, Ambassador. The delegation of Paraguay, how do you vote? The delegation of Paraguay votes in favor. Thank you very much, Mr. Martinez. The delegation of Peru, how do you vote? Peru votes in favor. Thank you very much, Ambassador. The delegation of the Dominican Republic, how do you vote? Dominican Republic in favor. Thank you very much, Ambassador.
Nevis. How do you vote?
St. Kitts and Nevis votes in favor.
Thank you, Ms. Bori Thompson. The delegation of St. Lucia, how do you vote?
St. Lucia votes in favor.
Thank you, Ms. Stephen. The delegation of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, how do you vote?
Good afternoon. The delegation of St. Vincent and the Grenadines abstains.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. We continue with the delegation of Suriname. Suriname, how do you vote? Suriname, please.
It's taking time.
Suriname votes in favor.
Thank you very much. The delegation of Trinidad and Tobago, how do you vote?
Trinidad and Tobago votes in favor.
Thank you, Ambassador. The delegation of Uruguay, how do you vote?
Uruguay in favor, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Ambassador. The delegation of Venezuela, how do you vote? Venezuela votes in favor. Thank you. Ambassador?
Do you vote? Antigua and Barbuda, please.
Antigua and Barbuda votes in favor.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. La delegación de Argentina.
The delegation of Argentina, how do you vote? In favor. Thank you, Ambassador.
Hamas. How?
The delegation of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas votes in favor.
Thank you, Ambassador. The delegation of Barbados, how do you vote?
Good afternoon. Barbados votes in favor.
Thank you, Ambassador. The delegation of Belize, how do you vote?
The delegation of Belize votes in favor.
Thank you, Ambassador. La delegación de Bolivia, ¿cuál es su...
The delegation of Bolivia, how do you vote? Bolivia, please request the floor. Good afternoon, Chair. Bolivia abstains. Thank you, Ambassador. The delegation of Brazil, how do you vote? The delegation of Brazil abstains.
The delegation of Canada, how do you vote?
Good afternoon, ASG. The delegation of Canada votes in favor.
Thank you, Ambassador. And finally, la delegación de Chile.
Lastly, the delegation of Chile, how do you vote? Chile votes in favor. Thank you very much, Mr. Saiz.
For us to count and verify the votes.
Estudio.
All yours.
Madam Chair, with your permission, I will now announce the results of the vote.
Thank you, ASG. Please
The results are as follows. Voting in favor of the resolution, 28 votes. Voting against the resolution, 0 votes. Abstaining, 5 votes, and there was 1 delegation absent. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, ASG. With a vote of 28 in favor, 0 in opposition, 5 abstentions, the Permanent Council hereby declares the draft resolution contained in document CP Doc 5763/21 Rev 2 approved. May I take that again, please, for the records? With a vote of 28 in favor, 0 in opposition, and 5 abstentions, with 1 absence, the Permanent Council hereby declares the draft resolution contained in document CP Doc 5763/21 Rev 2 approved. I note that the floor is being requested by the Permanent Observer of Ukraine and also by Ambassador Sir Ronald Sanders. According to the protocols established, I will offer the floor first to Ambassador Sanders. Ambassador Sanders, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I apologize for that technical difficulty. I simply wanted to take the floor, Madam Chair, to thank all of the delegations that have supported the delegations of Antigua and Barbuda and Guatemala on this very important resolution. The statement made here by the OAS today, the first statement that we've made as a collective body on the situation in Ukraine and the rising crisis in that country, which is now one of the crises of great humanitarian proportions. This vote is extremely significant for this organization. I regret very much, Madam Chair, that 5 of our member states did not see it within their means to support this resolution so that we could have had a unanimous result. Nonetheless, I understand that there are circumstances in each state which dictates their sovereign position. But it is extremely gratifying to me as the Dean of this Corps of Ambassadors here at the OAS, not as more as the Dean than it is as the representative of my own country, that the OAS has made this statement today, which is a statement to uphold and respect international law and to demand it of everyone, not only our own member states, but those who are permanent observers to this organization as well. I will leave it there, Madam Chair, because I'm sure there are many delegations that would wish to speak. My purpose now was merely to express my thanks for the support given to my delegation and that of the delegation of Guatemala in adopting this most important resolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Ron. I now offer the floor to Ambassador Rita de Scioli of Guatemala. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Ambassador, if you could request the floor. Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Greetings, Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, and the permanent representatives and alternate representatives of the member states, as well as the permanent observers of this organization. I join in to the words expressed by Ambassador Sanders and express my gratitude and for the way and this vote took place today, this historic vote that is. Guatemala has thanks you for the prompt calling of this special meeting of the president of the Permanent Council, and also with all of the countries, Grenada, Guyana, Haiti, Jamaica, Peru, Trinidad and Tobago, United States of Uruguay, Bahamas, Colombia, along with Antigua and Barbuda, along with my country, all of us who sponsored this. Different initiatives have been sponsored by us at the United Nations, in the Human Rights Council, in the Atomic Energy Commission, and other forums, consistent with the position of the Guatemalan state in this crisis. My country has promoted a month ago exactly, together with 25 states, the Declaration on the Situation in Ukraine in the UN. Through this declaration and in this hemispheric forum, we raise our voice to underscore the role we have to promote peace and stability in the hemisphere, as it is threatened by as its peace is threatened, so that we have a safe and stable hemisphere, which is essential for peace and prosperity worldwide. And so we affirm that international law is the norm of the conduct of states, and that international order rests on respect for sovereignty and personality and the territorial integrity of states, and faithful compliance with obligations that emanate from treaties and other sources of international law, and that good faith must follow relationships between each other. Today, as a founder of the OAS, it is in the spirit of this organization that Guatemala has deemed today by Ronald Sanders unavoidable that for this council to make a pronouncement as a political body and adopt this resolution on the crisis in Ukraine, which has had broad support from the membership. Chair, in the framework of our responsibilities and in the concert of nations, we cannot remain as spectators on the sidelines when there is illegality and unprovoked aggression from the Russian Federation, who more and more flagrantly violates the sovereignty and territory of Ukraine. Madam Chair, we are witnessing the ongoing displacement of families that flee an atrocious conflict. We have seen that the distance of Ukraine from us is no reason to ignore this crisis, and we, on the contrary, must show our support. And my president, and consistent with that spirit, as of March, has offered humanitarian assistance, allowing Ukrainian citizens to enter our country to seek refuge. Chair, the dire consequences of this crisis don't only affect that region, but we have noticed that the consequences of this will increase pressure on access to food and resources, thus affecting worldwide food security. The World Trade Organization has also expressed its concern for the economic repercussions that the crisis may have with regard to agricultural and food products, as well as increases in energy, because this crisis arises when the world is suffering from the consequences from the COVID-19 pandemic. Chair, Guatemala wants to echo the full content of the resolution we've just approved in view of the troubling and unacceptable humanitarian situation in Ukraine and lack of respect for human rights, and for there be a ceasing of any acts that would constitute crimes, war crimes. Guatemala, who is respectful, abides by international law, calls on diplomacy to try to avoid a greater scale of destruction. So we call for a peaceful solution to this crisis, respect for territory, international humanitarian law, and international human rights law. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Excellency. I now call on Ambassador Carlos Hativa, Permanent Representative of Ecuador. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. As Ecuador has said at the special meeting of the Permanent Council of February 25th, and a few days ago at the United Nations, my country condemns the military intervention of Russia in Ukraine, who violated its territorial sovereignty. This illegal invasion, it's unjustified and doesn't keep to the essential principles of peaceful, civilized coexistence of the UN Charter and the OAS Charter, including peaceful resolution of disputes and not using force, but rather diplomacy in such conflicts. And so Ecuador, therefore, co-sponsored this resolution. This afternoon, we voted in favor, together with the overwhelming majority of the countries who have expressed their view on this crisis in Ukraine. We have observed. We call on the permanent observers of these countries to justify this act. There's been all these deaths of women and children, has caused massive displacement and the forced departure of millions of people from from Ukraine. And this confirms the deterioration of the humanitarian situation in the country, in addition to the adverse incidents or consequences on the rest of the world, such as food shortages. So based on these complex and unacceptable circumstances, Ecuador says that its foreign service finds it unprecedented this situation. More than 30 of our officials have helped people in that country go to bordering countries and provide safety to them. In return, we also dealt with organizations and helped passengers and citizens from other nationalities for a total of 203 people. And in collaboration with other governments, we facilitated the entry in neighboring countries and repatriation in aircraft to their home countries. So we put on the record, therefore, Madam Chair, our profound concern over the consequences of this armed invasion with the attacks on civilians in the cities and schools and hospitals, in flagrant and clear violation of international obligations. So therefore, we call for observance and respect for human rights. And so for the foregoing reasons, Ecuador approves this resolution which addresses these humanitarian institutions. We call on peace and on the Russian Federation to immediately cease its aggression and to withdraw from the borders of Ukraine, from inside Ukraine across the borders, and to forge a peaceful solution to this. Nobody is above international law, regardless of their military might. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I now call on Mr. Gustavo Tare. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Assistant Secretary General, Secretary General. I'd like to begin by mentioning, as the title of the resolution says, the humanitarian crisis in light of the inability of a lightning victory due to the heroism of the Ukrainian people. The Russian Federation made the terrible decision to invade Ukraine using sophisticated weapons of destruction without heeding the fact that it was bombing residential areas, theaters, schools, and active aggression against unarmed civilians. The war is always a tragedy, but in this case, the situation is even further aggravated because of violation of clear and precise standards of international law. And these norms were put into place precisely to avoid war. We want to convey to Ambassador Makarova the solidarity with and admiration of the Venezuelan people and of the interim government of Venezuela to the people of Ukraine. And we call for a halting of aggression and military actions, and to begin a negotiation process that enables restoring the prior situation from before the special military operation began. We express our support to the resolution which we feel expresses the feelings of the peoples of Latin America, the Caribbean, and North America. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. I now offer the floor to the alternate representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. You have the floor, Mr. Williams.
Mr. Williams, could you please request the floor again? Once again. I think he's having technical problem. No, I give him the floor, but it's not going into the screen.
Shall we move on to the next speaker, please, and allow St. Vincent and the Grenadines to sort out the technical difficulties? Thank you very much. Your Excellency Ottavio Brandelli, the floor is yours, sir.
Ambassador, could you turn your microphone on? Madam Chair, thank you. I asked for the floor. Seen? Can you see me? Yes, we can see you. I requested the floor to explain Brazil's vote to abstain in the deliberation that we just had in the Permanent Council. The humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, it causes great concern and solidarity of all countries, but it's fundamental to keep to respect for decisions and political balance to favor diplomatic solutions to crises. Brazil wants there to be dialogue to settle disputes, and the role of the OAS, its other forum are suitable for this, not the OAS. So Brazil in February voted in favor of the resolution that was circulated by the United States, whose text condemned Russia's military operations in Ukraine. On the 27th of February, Brazil voted in favor of the resolution in the General Assembly of the UN. And on March 2nd, Brazil voted for the resolution with regard to aggression against Ukraine in the General Assembly and because we needed to send a strong message about Ukraine. But the Security Council, the Brazil called on the parties to engage in dialogue and that respects the sovereignty of Ukraine and observance of international law. And if the security interests of all involved should be taken into account, is what we called on. And the violation of the territorial integrity of Ukraine should also be taken into account. So with regard to the humanitarian consequences of this, Brazil has emphatically defended the right of international law to protect civilians and to act to not politicize this subject, the polarization of this subject matter. Brazil shares the concern of the international community and the deterioration of the humanitarian situation in Ukraine, as well as the violations of humanitarian law, which is the original subject of the resolution that was submitted to the Permanent Council for vote today. Nonetheless, Brazil abstained in this vote mostly because it finds that the text doesn't address certain things that should be addressed in the United Nations, like security, and it should be done in the Security Council and the General Assembly of the UN. And the appropriateness of such a subject being dealt with before the OAS, I believe that the OAS Charter, in the preamble, it says to it doesn't provide for this. So we believe that the text of this resolution is imbalanced because it has two brief mentions of diplomacy and dialogue. And in the view of the government, we don't find it a felicitous wording that was used in the resolution, and therefore it wouldn't vote. We don't believe it should be voted. We abstained. So on March 2nd in the General Assembly, we voted for immediate cessation of, quote, or a more effective way to respond to the humanitarian situation and humanitarian crisis. So it's obvious that with regard to the text of the OAS resolution, and under the Charter, it doesn't seek such a 2, 3, and 4 of the preamble, those paragraphs, it says in paragraph 5 makes mention that we don't think that in number 6 about the threats to peace and to the security of the hemisphere shouldn't be we don't know what the legal basis is of the OAS under the OAS Charter to make such a statement. And so we must remember that Brazil made statements at the Permanent Council in last February when it defended that the preferential forum for dealing with this is the Security Council of the United Nations. So, Madam Chair, with regard to the issue of the status of Russia's status as a permanent observer, I object to the operative paragraph 8 that says that in all we don't think that every international forum is the right place to deal with this issue of negotiations with Ukraine. We have doubts about consideration of that topic before this permanent council. And so there's doubts also whether the Permanent Council of the OAS has the power to continue examining matters of Ukraine. And I think it is the job of all parties to respect international law as it expressed in operative paragraph 8. And so this should be done in multilateral fora with a diplomat. There's no question that this is what this should be done. We want a peaceful, to bring about a peaceful solution to Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. Pardon me. Thank you, Excellency. I now offer the floor to Ambassador Carlos Raimunde of Argentina. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Argentina reiterates its position and the position that it took on the 25th of February based on the principles of peace and humanitarian considerations. We believe that the situation goes over and above regional issues in the OAS, and we look at various aspects in keeping with the United Nations Charter, but this does not in any way justify any implications or involvement in the conflict itself. there is increasing concern about human rights and humanitarian rights. And this is valid for all cases where you have humanitarian crises and anything that affects the civil population because of armed intervention, not just for this situation, but in all cases. I insist that this is focused on the grave concern of the humanitarian crisis, given the large number of people, of refugees that need humanitarian assistance. And humanitarian assistance has always been a focus in our country. We're looking at a mission of white helmets in this conflict. And the ministry looks at this from the humanistic point of view in solidarity and the work that the white helmets carry out. And once again, there should be a move for peace which guides our actions, as well as to preserve the life of people, which is the highest level of human rights, as we have it in Argentina, as was said in the 49th meeting of human rights session in the United Nations. With the words of Pope Francis, he insisted that all parties should abstain from any action that can cause even more harm to populations and that works against living together within the framework of international law. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I'm now pleased to offer the floor to Ambassador Hector Arce of Bolivia. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. The plurinational state of Bolivia is deeply concerned in the need for dialogue between two sovereign nations that are at conflict and that need to find peaceful solutions to these conflicts via dialogue, diplomacy, and respect for international humanitarian law, and particularly for human rights. We defend the life of all human beings, and we defend sovereignty, independence, the right to self-determination, and maintenance of peace for all states. We also are in favor of legal instruments for a peaceful solution of conflicts. In this order of things, it's important to underscore that during the special session of the Permanent Council of the 25th of February, where we had a declaration on the situation in Ukraine, we make an appeal, a decided encouragement for peace for all diplomatic solutions within the framework of international law, and especially within the framework of the Charter of the United Nations, which is the only multilateral organization that can intervene in these kinds of situations. Madam Chairman, ambassadors, Bolivia agrees in a sure way forward for Ukraine and facilitate access to humanitarian assistance without any discrimination based on nationality or anything else. On the other hand, all of us need to look at the violations of humanitarian law, violation of human rights of the people affected. And then finally, Bolivia agrees and insists that all parties respect their obligations in the light of international humanitarian law, particularly with respect to the protection of civilian population. Nonetheless, Madam Chairman, the plurinational state of Bolivia knows that we're talking about an extra-regional issue that is broached in the United Nations, and that is the multilateral trustworthy organization to broach international issues of this kind. Once again, in this forum, we defend the right of peoples to live in peace, which is an undeniable part of human rights that is enshrined in the defense of life and a peaceful way forward for international humanitarian law. In conclusion, we categorically decry that in this organization we have the forum for discussion or anything that is not in keeping with diplomacy and talks for a peaceful solution, as we have it in indent 8 of the resolution that was approved. In keeping with what was already expressed, Bolivia abstained on this current resolution. Thank you very much.
I now give the floor to the interim representative of the United States of America. Mr. Frieden, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Mr. Frieden, could you please request the floor again?
It appears as if the interim representative of the United States might be having some technical difficulties. In that respect, I will now give the floor to Ambassador Hugh Adsett of Canada. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Canada firmly decries the unjustifiable invasion, the unprovoked invasion by President Putin. This goes against international law. We look at all of the entirety of this crisis and the massive displacement and destruction that is generalized, which is a direct move against Ukraine by the Federation of Russia. Ukrainians have been displaced and are forced to move. Millions of Ukrainians are in question. This represents the combined population of Uruguay and Paraguay. As a result, the consequences are horrible. And schools, other institutions have been hit, and there's endless suffering. And I'm going to now continue in English.
Attack on Ukraine, but an attack on the principles that underpin the rules-based international system. This is the same system that is fundamental to our work here at the Organization of American States. Our region will not go unscathed. Putin's actions have led to serious energy and food security issues that have global impact, including for members of this body. Putin's attempt to terrorize the Ukrainian people by deliberately targeting the civilian population renders Russia an international pariah. As evidence, yesterday the UN General Assembly adopted by an overwhelming majority a resolution reflecting the international community's continued grave concerns about the situation in Ukraine. Russia's continued presence as a permanent observer to the OAS is inconsistent with our shared values and commitments under the OAS Charter to peace and security, to sovereignty, territorial integrity, independence, and to a rejection of wars of aggression. We're disappointed that despite the overwhelming evidence and clear violations of international law, and our own OAS principles, we were not able to incorporate measures to suspend Russia in today's resolution. In the near future, we expect that OAS members will come together in this forum to demonstrate to Russia that their inexcusable actions have real consequences. Canada continues to believe that at its core, the OAS is a principled organization with deep and long-standing commitments to democracy, human rights, and to peace. Let us not falter in these commitments. Let us rise to this occasion. Our citizens, our region, and indeed the entire international community demand no less of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I now call on Ambassador Washington Abdallah to take the floor. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. As a co-sponsor with deep-seated respect for this issue, I say this because with regards to the declaration, it's very substantive and it makes express attention of the deterioration of the humanitarian situation in Ukraine. As we reviewed the different international instruments and the information that we get in the network, we're absolutely over the top in what we're seeing. We are looking at a lot of different factors, and these restrictions and everything has affected 3 million Ukrainians. They are in despair that they have to leave their own country, their homeland. This is a situation which is terrible. They're suffering tremendously, more so than anybody can suffer. In the Treaty of Rome, punishment is one thing, but being banned from your own homeland is something else. And we see that these Ukrainians that are fleeing from their land are leaving everything, life, existence, soul, everything, even family members that are there. We have to look at international humanitarian law that urges all parties. Point 3, it urges all parties. Point 4, it says that all parties respect provisions of international humanitarian law. International humanitarian law has underpinned 4 conventions of Geneva. It's been around for decades, and it basically regulates the behavior in warlike situations. This is what we're talking about, warlike situations that have to do with this invasion, and it explicitly asks the Russian Federation to immediately withdraw all of their military equipment and forces from the international borders of Ukraine and return to dialogue, diplomatic talks. This is very important because we are an international community. We have an arena for the settlement of controversies or conflicts. And we have a voice like the one we're having today of 28 countries that are aligned in a humanist or position that respects human rights, that understands that peace is the only possible way for all of us, and that there's a people, a country that is submitted or in the face of an attack, and all of us have to be committed in all due respect. But when I see the life of people, the way things are, one is on one side, others on the other side. The president of Uruguay said that insofar as there are mechanisms that can be used, the Ukrainians who can come to the region will be able to count on Uruguay. We are immigrants by and large. I speak directly to this, whether they immigrate from Syria or whether they immigrate from wars or from wherever. When there's this kind of war, an invasion like this, the least we can do is have some kind of feeling to see where we have to stand on the issue. And the truth of the matter is, for President Zelensky, for the moment we have to say that we're all Ukrainians. We are all Ukrainians in the face of this horrendous experience that the country is going through. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. I now call on the alternate representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as he had been next in line some time ago. Thank you very much. Mr. Williams, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Mr. Secretary General, Mr. Assistant Secretary General, ambassadors, permanent representatives, permanent observers, alternate representatives, members of staff of the OAS General Secretariat, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Madam Chair, it is indeed an honor and privilege to be addressing you as Chair at today's special meeting of the Permanent Council. Please permit me as well to use this opportunity on behalf of the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to express to the government and people of the United States our deepest condolences on the passing of former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. Secretary Albright was a remarkable woman who set the pace for her female successors in Condoleezza Rice and Hillary Clinton, and she also inspired the next generation of women to be engaged in diplomacy. Madam Chair, my delegation takes the floor to explain the position of St. Vincent and the Grenadines on this resolution, the crisis in Ukraine. Madam Chair, my delegation recognizes the extreme difficulties, suffering, and the humanitarian situation in Ukraine, and therefore supports in principle the substance and intent of the draft resolution just adopted. In fact, Madam Chair, our government voted in favor of the draft resolution A/ES-11/1.2, humanitarian consequences of the aggression against Ukraine at the General Assembly of the United Nations, a resolution much stronger than the one tabled here today. Madam Chair, my delegation finds it extremely problematic to speak of defending sovereignty and independence in Ukraine if it means that we are, in this permanent council, joining our voice and our name to a resolution supported by the purported representative of Juan Guaido. The very presence of this purported representative is evidence of subversion of the very same principles of sovereignty and independence in Venezuela. It undermines the struggle for independence and sovereignty. Madam Chair, my delegation informs this august body that the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. the Honorable Ralph E. Gonsalves, dispatched a letter to President Putin asking for peace. We therefore reiterate that our abstention is based not on the substance of the resolution itself, but on the disregard for fundamental principles, fairness, and consistency. I thank you.
Thank you, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I now offer the floor to the Ambassador of Colombia.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. With the resolution approved today, my state also expresses the hemispheric and international concerns with the grave humanitarian situation in Ukraine that has left millions dead, more than 6 million displaced, and 3 million refugees in its wake. And furthermore, the destruction of civil infrastructure, schools, etc. Colombia thus reiterates its solidarity with the Ukrainian people and joins its voice in this forum to express a firm rejection in the face of this violent lack of respect for personnel and life, as well as to ask for the protection of the civilian population. Nobody can be indifferent in the face of suffering of millions of human beings. I would like to remind all that the system of the United Nations, the same organization of American states, and the Geneva Conventions, the additional protocols, suggested after a devastating war that led to us looking at that even in the cruelest conflicts, there should be a minimum of humanity. With the collective voice in the face of a crisis beyond the America's border, things have been inevitable, and our organization cannot remain silent in the huge challenge of the crisis that the crisis in Ukraine means for the establishment of principles and respect of human rights and international humanitarian law. And it's on these pillars that undergird the American system as a regional organization in keeping with the United Nations. It's quite clear that, as mentioned, that a stable hemisphere depends on peace and world security. Madam Chairman, Colombia reiterates its call to the Russian Federation to cease this aggression as soon as possible. It goes against a sovereign nation, and to respect all of the rules of international humanitarian law, including humanitarian assistance. Multilateralism, constructive dialogue, free dialogue on equal conditions are the only weapons that should be used in the face of this crisis that is in Ukraine, but that has an impact in all nations. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
I'm now pleased to offer the floor to the interim representative of the United States who had a request for the floor earlier. Thank you. The floor is yours, Mr. Friedan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was cut off during my remarks, and so I apologize for if some of this is repetitive. We express our solidarity with the people and the government of Ukraine. As Secretary Blinken mentioned previously, in this time of uncertainty, we have a clear way forward. Help Ukraine defend itself. Support the Ukrainian people. Hold Russia accountable. Since this distinguished body last met to consider the crisis in Ukraine, Putin's unprovoked and unjustified war in Ukraine has led to a humanitarian crisis, including repeated violations of international humanitarian law, human rights abuses, and war crimes. Putin has been clear about his war aims. He seeks to conquer and annex Ukraine, its people, and its sovereign territory to the Russian Federation. If he cannot conquer Ukraine, he aims to destroy it. His purported justification for this unbridled war of aggression: Ukraine was once part of an earlier Russian empire. Well, we have news for Mr. Putin. The age of empires and imperial conquest is over. The age of large, powerful countries dictating their foreign policy of the smaller neighbors is over. And the age of resolving border disputes at the point of a gun is over. Ladies and gentlemen, Putin's purported logic threatens all of us. It threatens the very foundation of international law. It threatens international peace and security. It threatens every country in this hemisphere that has an unresolved border dispute with its neighbor. And most directly of all, it threatens the innocent Ukrainian civilians who are the immediate target of Putin's cowardly attacks. The world has witnessed indiscriminate attacks on population centers, attacks deliberately targeting civilians, as well as other atrocities, many of which constitute war crimes. Russia's forces have destroyed apartment buildings, schools, hospitals, critical infrastructure, civilian vehicles, shopping centers, and ambulances, leaving thousands of civilians killed or wounded. Many of these sites were clearly identifiable as being in use by civilians, including the Mariupol Maternity Hospital and the Mariupol Theater, which was clearly marked in Russian with enormous letters that read out "children," easily visible from the air. Putin's forces used the same tactics in Grozny and Aleppo, where they intensified their bombardment of cities to break the will of the people, just as was done in the Middle Ages. Their attempt to do so in Ukraine has again shocked the world, and as President Zelensky has soberly attested, bathed the people in Ukraine in blood and tears. Earlier this week, Secretary Blinken announced that based on the information currently available, the U.S. government does indeed assess that members of Russia's forces have committed war crimes in Ukraine and should be held accountable. Here I must respectfully disagree with my distinguished colleague and friend from Brazil. While it may be true that the OAS is not the institution that will resolve the war Putin has unleashed on Ukraine, however, as peace-loving democracies, it is certainly within our rights to decide with whom we will treat, with whom we will sit down, and who will be a member of our club. As a region, we cannot witness silently these actions, and we are called upon to act. The OAS is the region's premier political forum for multilateral dialogue and action. Our hemisphere has a rich diversity of peoples and cultures, but we are united in our common values. Through this resolution, particularly with the OAS member states who co-sponsored, we are reminded of our commitment in the OAS Charter to peace and justice. I applaud the missions of Guatemala, Colombia, and Antigua and Barbuda for leading this resolution. Today, the OAS is taking a step to speak clearly and directly. We do not accept these serious violations of international law. We do not accept the basis of Putin's war against the Ukrainian people. We urge Russia to cease its brutal attacks and withdraw from Ukraine immediately. The implications of Russia's war on Ukraine impact us all. We must remain united in our message to support the Ukrainian people and hold Russia accountable. We look forward to continuing to work with OAS member states to uphold the values of the international system and support a return to the status quo ante. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Friedan. I now call on His Excellency Ambassador Harold Forsyth of Peru. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to join into your comments in that we must recall or remember the late Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. We very much regret her passing. We remember her fondly because she played a very important role in the restoration of human rights and the rule of law in Peru. May God hold her in his glory. But I'd like to thank the representative of Antigua and Barbuda and the representative of Guatemala who have worked tirelessly over these last days. I want to thank you tirelessly on this resolution, which a few minutes ago became an official document of the Organization of American States. It's my impression, Madam Chair, that this speaks quite well of our organization, that we're just not able to keep quiet when all of the other organizations of the world had voiced their feelings and expressed the distress and anguish about what's happening in Ukraine. I must also point out that when the Secretary General took the initiative to dress our headquarters with the colors of Ukraine, we all identified with that. It's of concern, and I'm going to be very brief, it's concern that the concept of war is becoming normalized, and that someone may assume that war may be a source of law, that a country invading and declaring war on another is a source of war. But diplomacy is essential. It's fundamental. But what happened? What the Russian Federation should have done is to bring to the table its concerns, and that's why we have international organizations. And I'm sure it would have had a significant backing, but war is not a source of law. So when you talk about return to diplomacy and dialogue, we cannot view these concepts as two equal, comparable states whose mutual will should be evident at a negotiation table, because that's not the way it is. Otherwise, we'd be saying that war, invasion, and this bellicose action, we'll be considering it as a source of law. And this is a huge imbalance between one country that's much larger with much more military might as compared to the Republic of Ukraine. And this is not only causing a lot of loss of life internally or domestically in Ukraine, but also it's causing loss of life to the Russian Federation. And as Madame Lourdes said from Antigua and Barbuda, we're seeing damage to all countries of the planet, to Peru and to all member states of our organization. In addition to this, Madam Chair, we viewed in perplexity how Ukraine is being devastated, huge devastation to property, to the roofs over people's houses. Many years will have to go by before things can be restored after such a violent attack that it is the target of right now. We must point out this historic resolution we've just passed at our organization with the most constructive spirit possible. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
I now offer the floor to Ambassador Lucilena Baños of Mexico. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let us recall Madeleine Albright, and we express our condolences to the permanent mission of the United States. Madam Chair, Mexico expresses once again its total rejection of the invasion by the Russian Federation of Ukraine and continues concern about the dramatic humanitarian crisis that the civilian population is undergoing, which could get even worse. The appropriate forum to address the topic that we're dealing with today is the United Nations, where Mexico has been actively working both in the Security Council as a permanent member thereof, as well as the General Assembly, to achieving yesterday's approval of a resolution proposed in coordination with France, which deals with both the hostilities as well as the humanitarian crisis, which, according to the Coordinating Office of Humanitarian Crisis of the UN, there's 12 million people who are directly affected by this, and around 3 million people who are refugees now, mostly women and children, and more than 1 million internally displaced people. This conflict is globally affects us all, and that's why Mexico considers it fundamental for the international community to work in the UN to be effective in seeking a peaceful negotiated solution, but particularly one that is sustainable, that can bring lasting peace and put in the center of everything the human dignity. Mexico will continue to work responsibly, committed in the United Nations to come up with a peaceful conflict to the solution through political dialogue, negotiation, mediation, and other peaceful means that demand full respect for international humanitarian law and a rejection of foreign intervention of any type, as well as the use or the threat of use of force in international relations. My country is heavily pacifist. It maintains a position that's based on international law, the UN Charter, and the principles of the Mexican foreign policy, defending at all times non-intervention, respect for sovereignty, and sovereignty of states in defense of human rights. Mexico is staunchly against foreign interference that are not justified for any reason, in any instance, in any country. The destruction caused by foreign invasions have caused irreparable damage to Mexico and are unacceptable to us. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm now pleased to offer the floor to Ambassador Oksana Markarova of Ukraine. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Ambassador, we cannot hear you. Ambassador?
Ambassador, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
No, yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Esteemed Mr. President, Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, ambassadors of the member states, and observers, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak at this podium. We are grateful to the missions of Antigua and Barbuda and Guatemala for initiating this and for other states co-sponsoring and conducting today's meeting and this resolution. A month ago, on the 25th of February, the Permanent Council adopted a declaration on situation in Ukraine. We appreciate the position of Organization of American States in support of our country. Yesterday, the UN, by overwhelming majority, adopted the resolution on humanitarian consequences of the aggression against Ukraine. Also yesterday, we sadly marked a symbolic date, 1 month since the lives of millions of Ukrainians were split into two parts, a peaceful part, full of joy and positive plans, and the present part, with war, suffering, death, and destruction. And the only reason for this is unprovoked, unjustified, brutal aggression of a neighboring country, Russian Federation. And the situation is simply black and white. It's another country that crossed a border and attacked independent, innocent, peaceful country. Thousands of Ukrainians have lost their lives over these months. Young, old, women and men, civilians and military. They all died because Russia decided to attack. They all died because Russia decided to attack Ukraine, attack peace, but attack all of us who believe that we can have a right to live within the borders of our country. Every day of this Russian war against Ukraine aggravates humanitarian situation further and further. And in a nutshell, it has already reached the level of humanitarian disaster in the middle of Europe, something that we didn't experience or seen after the World War II finished. People have been killed in the attempt to flee from the war-affected areas. Cities are erased to the ground by shelling and airstrike. Russia attacks from east, north, south by all kinds of weapons, including the prohibited weapons by Geneva Convention. The residential areas of cities such as Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Sumy, Mariupol, Melitopol, outskirts of Kiev, and many others are intensely bombed, shelled, leaving daily dozens of innocent civilians killed and wounded. The areas which are temporarily controlled by the Russian criminal military are scenes of war crimes and military crimes, with people murdered and innocent women and men and children murdered and raped. The war situation remains in the besieged city of Mariupol, which is now almost destroyed and for the past 16 days encircled by Russian army without food, water, any supplies, and without Russian Federation allowing the humanitarian corridors, but instead actually kidnapping people and forcing them to go to Russia, while the overwhelming majority of people would like to stay in Ukraine. With also people in Kherson, which is also controlled by the Russian army, on a daily basis coming to the main street of Kherson and essentially with peaceful protests saying one thing only: Russians go home, leave us alone. And in return to this, Russian soldiers shoot at peaceful democratic protesters. According to UNICEF, 1 month of the war has already led to displacement of 4.3 million children. This is more than half of the country's estimated 7.5 million population of children, including more than 1.8 million children who already crossed the border into the neighboring countries, with horrifying accounts of children crossing without their parents, fleeing to safety. According to Prosecutor General, 128 children were killed by Russian invaders and 172 injured. And all of our children forever are scarred by this experience. Kindergartens and schools, universities and hospitals, airports and fuel stations, bridges, food warehouses, water reservoirs, all of this, together with civilian homes, are targeted by Russian army. What kind of operation is this? What kind of military fights with civilians? 566 educational institutions, more than 100 hospitals, and more than 3,780 residential buildings are no longer existent after this attack has started. In the city of Kharkiv alone, 1,000 residential buildings were entirely destroyed. In Mariupol, 2,000 buildings were entirely destroyed. Our neighboring countries, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Moldova, Romania, many others, are stretched to their limits, accommodating millions of Ukrainian refugees. To date, almost 4 million, and almost 10 million, over 10 million, are internally displaced because people are fleeing to safety inside the country. What is happening in Ukraine is not only about Ukraine. It affects everyone, and I salute those of you who openly say it here. It's not just our country that is under attack. It's the very foundation of the world rule-based order, security and architecture, and international law that has been under attack. We are reliving the 1939 moment when Hitler's country attacked innocent, independent countries in Europe. It's exactly happening again when fascist Russia is attacking Ukraine and threatening everyone else in the region. And unless we together, all of us, all civilized countries, stop this war, stop Russia while it's still in Ukraine, they will threaten all other states, and it will not end in Ukraine. So we urgently need humanitarian assistance, and we are grateful to all the countries, including the countries of the American states that provided to us. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, I welcome today's resolution on behalf of all Ukrainian people and appreciate the efforts of the organization, its member states, and all the observers, except for Russian Federation, to end hostilities and restore peace. I know that your organization believes in our organization, believes in the rule of law, believes in sovereignty, and has respect to all of this. I urge the member states at the next session to consider withdrawing Russia of the status of the permanent observer, because we deem it unacceptable for somebody who doesn't respect the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, and who think it's okay to kill children and to kill innocent people on the territory of another state, to sit around the table with people who do respect it. I'm confident that this move will prove the adherence to the OAS own charter and all the principles of international law that are enshrined in this charter. And with that, I would like to once again say thank you to everyone who voted in favor today. Thank you to everyone who is trying to help Ukraine and ultimately help all of us to restore the international order in which all of us can feel safe and know that we can still all live peacefully in our countries and not be threatened by any neighbors. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I'm now pleased to offer the floor to Sir Ronald Sanders, Ambassador of Antigua and Barbuda. Ambassador Sanders, you have the floor, sir.
Chair, thank you very much for the opportunity, but I really wanted to speak at the end of the presentations of everyone so that I can say a few words on behalf of the proponent delegations of this resolution. So with your permission, I would allow all of the permanent observer missions to proceed, and if you agree, I will make the remarks at the end of them all. Thank you.
The chair so agrees, Sir Ron. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I now offer the floor to Ambassador de la Blache, Permanent Observer of France. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madame la Présidente, Monsieur le Secrétaire Général.
Firstly, I'd like to thank the ambassador of the permanent mission of Guatemala and Antigua and Barbuda for offering this resolution, also sponsored by the countries. And also I'd like to, Ambassador Marakova, I'd like to greet her because she is, and her country are facing a serious crisis, and being realistic, involve every country in the region. The attack by Russia is a violation of the UN Charter and of international law, and it jeopardizes all principles of our country, such as peaceful resolution of disputes and inviolability of borders. This has dramatic humanitarian consequences, with millions of deaths, more than 10 million displaced persons, mostly men or women, have left their countries. 3.7 million have looked for refuge in different countries, such as my own in France, and looking for aid and to welcome. Many countries are trying to take in these, and there are refugees in North America and South America, mostly in Guatemala, Mexico, and Brazil, who have been welcomed generously. This drama cannot go on. It must cease. immediately. That is, the hostilities must cease, as has been requested today. How come we tolerate systematic attacks against civilians, causing victims who are women and children, elderly people, and persons with disabilities? How can we accept this if France welcomes the movement of the international community, the UN and the OAS today, to call for the end to hostilities and to respect international humanitarian law, and offering its solidarity with a country that it has been violently attacked? 140 countries of all continents voted yesterday in favor of the resolution introduced in the General Assembly, which was introduced by France and Mexico, with 90 other countries that co-sponsored. France is particularly sensitive to the broad support of the countries of the Americas who defend the principles of the UN Charter, which are also the principles of the OAS Charter and of international humanitarian law. The opinions and positions of the countries of the Americas and the Caribbean are important collectively and individually for today and for the future. The resolution that has just been approved in the OAS has been approved by a vast majority of the countries of the Americas, which reinforces the message that was conveyed yesterday in New York. We ask for there to be truly protected humanitarian corridors for civilians to get out safely and to bring in humanitarian aid, and that the Russians leave Ukrainian territory immediately, no strings attached. And food security has to be bolstered. And yesterday, France, at the G7 summit, a world food security initiative. This will use private and public sectors and will bring together all the partners. There's a commercial pillar to avoid shortages and failure of export of agricultural products. The second pillar is to deal with the emergencies, and to bring about further lasting investment in farming. Madam Chair and Mr. Executive Secretary General and everyone, in all of Europe and in the Americas, we should make our voices heard. We should keep united in the face of this violation, which is so dire, and it's such a violation of the UN Charter, the OAS Charter, and international humanitarian law. Thank you very much.
Representative of the European Union, Mr. Michael Curtis, to make his presentation. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Vice Chair of the Permanent Council, Your Excellency Ambassador Luan Gilchrist, Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General Mendes, distinguished permanent representatives, and fellow permanent observers. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to address for the second time in a month this special session of the Permanent Council to consider a resolution on the crisis in Ukraine. Let me also thank the permanent missions of Antigua and Barbuda and Guatemala for requesting this meeting, as well as their co-sponsors. Just let me begin by reaffirming the statement of the European Council adopted in Brussels yesterday, following an exchange of views with the President of the United States. All 27 EU member states, heads of state and government, again condemned Russia's continued war of aggression against Ukraine, which grossly violates international law and is causing massive loss of life and injury to civilians. The EU demands that Russia cease immediately its military aggression, unconditionally withdraw from the entire territory of Ukraine, and fully respect Ukraine's territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence within its internationally recognized borders. The European Union is united in offering its strong support to Ukraine and its people, and affirms it will continue to provide coordinated political, financial, material, and humanitarian support. And I salute the work of Ambassador Markarova and for joining us here today. The European Union, as you know, has adopted significant sanctions that target Russia's leaders and elites, as well as strategic sectors of the economy that are having a massive impact impact, we also remain ready to move quickly with further coordinated sanctions on Russia and Belarus. Russia's military aggression against Ukraine has forced millions of people to flee their homes, many of which have found shelter and safety in the member states of the European Union. We remain committed to provide Ukraine support for its immediate needs and for the eventual reconstruction of a democratic Ukraine. To that end, the European Union agrees to develop a Ukraine Solidarity Trust Fund and invites its international partners to participate. The effects of the Russian war are disrupting vital food supplies and driving food prices up. On top of that, Putin is blocking hundreds of ships filled with wheat in the Black Sea. We call on Putin to let those ships go, otherwise he will not only be responsible for war and death, but also for hunger and even possibly famine. The European Union has assigned at least €2.5 billion until 2024 to help regions across the world facing food insecurity. Chair, let me conclude by saying that with this war on Ukraine, the world will never be the same. It is now more than ever the time for societies and alliances to come together to be on the right side of history and to build our future on trust, justice and freedom. It is the moment to stand up and to speak out. So we welcome the adoption of today's resolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I now offer the floor to Monsignor Juan Antonio Cruz Serrano of the Holy See. The floor is yours, Monsignor.
Madam Chairman, Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, the Holy See, as an observer country of the OAS, truly appreciates convening this special meeting of the Permanent Council to consider the resolution, the crisis in Ukraine. We also value recognition of the operative part of this document and the opportunity for observer nations to facilitate dialogue and negotiations to end the hostilities. Pope Francis has shown his solidarity with the Ukrainian people. And as such, presence continues with this country for the people who are affected. Those who remain in Kiev despite the war. 2 cardinals have been sent to offer those who are in need and also to serve for development and help the refugees and those affected. The war in Ukraine reminds us that with war, everything is lost. There's no winning a war. Everybody loses. It is a loss for humanity. And it reminds us that to carry weapons will not solve the problem. We have to work together for peace. The Holy See is available for everyone to offer services and considers that there's always room for negotiation. And that is why it continues to offer its good offices to facilitate serious and constructive talks between the parties so as to find a joint solution. This mediation doesn't have any of its own interests at heart, nor does it impose conditions. The only condition is that one recognizes freedom and responsibility of the parties, and that they accept the intervention of the Holy See. This delegation would like to point out that today all communities are invited, all human beings are invited to join Pope Francis in an event that recognizes all mankind, Russia, and Ukraine, so that peace shall reign and peace will be attained for the entire world. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
The floor, with pleasure, to Ambassador Carmen Monton, Permanent Observer of Spain.
Good afternoon. Spain would like to reiterate its condemnation in the most determined voice against the aggression against Ukraine. We're talking about a violation, a clear-cut, unjustified violation against the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine and against the principles and purposes of the Charter of the United Nations. With these acts, Russia has taken away peace and stability in Europe and gravely threatens all of the international community across the board. Spain reaffirms once again its full-fledged commitment to sovereignty and the internal integrity of Ukraine within its own borders, which are internationally recognized, including Crimea. This is a principle which is enshrined in the very charter of this Organization of American States. Most of the international community has launched a strong message of condemnation, which is clear in the resolutions taken up in the United Nations General Assembly against Russian aggression against Ukraine and in the light of the humanitarian crisis around which there's a consensus. On the 24th of March, 140 votes in favor, respectively. We celebrate the adoption of the declaration by the Permanent Council of this organization that condemns the invasion, the unjustified, unprovoked invasion into Ukraine, and which calls on Russia to withdraw its troops from Ukraine. We also celebrate the proposal and approval of the draft resolution today. Both bear witness to the value this organization accords to the defense of its guiding principles and raises this as an institution committed to peace and security and the defense of international law. It reminds us in this forum that there is cooperation from Spain, which will grapple with the consequences of this conflict as well as looking at our own policy to welcome Ukrainians. And I echo the comments made by the EU representative and offer a warm greeting to Ambassador Markova. Thank you very much.
I'm now pleased to offer the floor to the Permanent Observer of Italy, Ambassador Simone De Santi. Excellency, you have the floor.
Assistant Secretary General, ambassadors. Italy is fully aligned with the statement of France as presidency of the European Union and that of the European Union by way of the European delegation here. So I will not repeat what has been already said in terms of our very strong actions as a result of the Russian aggression towards Ukraine as a European Union, but I should also add in the context of the G7, NATO, and the United Nations. Italy has been firm and resolute in all contexts, launching initiatives to promote accountability and uphold the norms of international law, contributing significantly, for example, to NATO's reassurance and deterrence measures in the eastern flank, and as well as the European peace facilities, and introducing heavy sanctions against Russia and Belarus. Allow me to especially stress today the importance of the humanitarian dimension of the crisis, which represents an important element of the OAS resolution adopted. Our own efforts on the humanitarian front are intensifying every day. As of today, more than 50,000 refugees have arrived in Italy, most of them women and children, and we will continue to host increasing numbers of refugees throughout Italy as they arrive. The Italian government is also implementing the EU Council decision to introduce temporary protection to Ukrainian refugees. And of course, we are contributing financially to the efforts of UN agencies on the ground, especially UNHCR and the Red Cross, as well as in-kind medical supplies being shipped thanks to the work of our civil protections. Moreover, I want to, as an example, I want to mention also that on February the 27th, the Foreign Minister of Italy, Luigi Di Maio, approved the transfer of 110 million euros to support the general budget of the Ukrainian government. This amount has been at the disposal of the Ukrainian Treasury since February 28. Finally, I cannot forget the support also to Ukraine's education and cultural sectors. So a special fund has been set up to assist Ukrainian children that are in the schooling years and students in the higher education institutions, such as researchers, professors in the universities. Whereas in the cultural sector, we've also launched programs to support Ukrainian artists, cultural professionals, offering hospitality, residency, scholarships, training, and financing for these types of projects. And we are ready to continue to collaborate with Ukrainian authorities in order to safeguard also the cultural heritage of Ukraine. Mr. President, thank you for calling this meeting today. I believe it shows the strength and the unity of the international community in responding to this terrifying war and our joint efforts to do as much as possible to end it, putting the well-being of innocent civilians first. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I now offer the floor to Alexander Kim, the representative of the Permanent Observer Mission of Russia. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Dear Madam President, esteemed colleagues, first of all, I categorically reject provocative and baseless accusations made by the Ukrainian ambassador. Any comparisons of Russia with the Hitler Germany are outrageous and unacceptable. It is the Kiev regime which pursues Nazi practices against the Russian-speaking population in Ukraine. We find it inappropriate for the Organization of American States to consider issues that are not relevant to the Western Hemisphere, such as the situation in Ukraine, which was made the topic of today's meeting and the resolution. There are enough multilateral organizations in the world that are more suitable to deal with the crisis of European security. It must be said that Russia, as a member of a number of Eurasian forums, strives not to discuss issues relevant to other parts of the world. We are sure that the lack of logic in convening of today's meeting is as apparent to us as to other participants. We encourage you not to waste time and energy necessary for solving real and not fictional problems of the Western Hemisphere. We're deeply concerned with the misrepresentation of the situation in Ukraine in today's resolution. Adoption of such documents will only complicate the settlement in Ukraine. It most likely will embolden Ukrainian representatives and encourage them to stick to their counterproductive position in negotiations with Russia. Immediately before the 24th of February, we obtained information of Ukraine's intention to launch a massive offensive against Donbas. There were direct indications of that. By that time, Ukraine had amassed approximately 120,000 servicemen along the line of contact. We started special operation in order to protect the peaceful people of Donbas, to stop the 8 years long Kiev's war and genocide, which our Western colleagues tried to ignore. I would like to remind you that the significant part of the population of this region are citizens of Russia. In order to ensure that Ukraine no longer poses a threat to Russia, we need to denazify and demilitarize it. This is the goal of our military operation. We said it from the very beginning that we would not target civilian objects. Ukrainian nationalists and radicals were aware of that. So after realizing they would be held accountable for the atrocities committed over the last 8 years, they started to use civilians as a human shield, deploy heavy weapons in residential areas, prevent people from leaving cities through humanitarian corridors. This is what provoked a humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. We would like to stress that we are not starting the war, we are finishing it. It is high time to put an end to war crimes of Kiev regime, which it has been committing against its own people. Russia is doing everything possible to reach the solutions by means of negotiations in order to stop the confrontation as soon as possible, re-establish peace in Donbass, and ensure the return of all the peoples of Ukraine to the peaceful life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now offer the floor to Christoph Sommer, the representative of Switzerland. The floor is yours, Excellency.
Gracias, señora Presidente, señor Secretario.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, Member States, Permanent Observers, Ambassador. Swiss commends the organization for this special, very important meeting and commends Tigran Bagut and Guatemala for their initiatives. Russia began its unprovoked military aggression against Ukraine, and since then, the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine has reached unimaginable proportions. The civilian population and the civilian infrastructure are objects of attacks daily. The most recent attacks, we have the bombardment of Mariupol, which was used as a refuge for civilians. These go against protesters in Kherson as well, which is illegally occupied. What this case and other cases have in common is that this is a flagrant lack of respect for all of mankind, international humanitarian law, international law, and international law of human rights. In addition, everything is moved against civilians. This is a war crime. And on these attacks, we have to look at and have to also say that these undefensible actions must stop immediately. We have to look at the principles, proportionality, and all of this has to be respected under all circumstances. Madam Chairman, we're looking at a picture of a humanitarian crisis which is being produced in Ukraine. The situation is taking place in various cities, Kharkiv, Kiev, Mariupol, and many others, because the Russian Federation does not allow for the arrival of supplies. The humanitarian organizations need quick access to help those in need. We make an appeal to the parties to immediately cease hostilities and quickly help all that need it. In this context, we are very satisfied that there is a general condemnation of the United Nations with also a quest for looking for a solution and offering humanitarian assistance. Madam Chairman, we have to look at peaceful processes and a peaceful settlement of conflicts. We've taken due note of the provisional measures in the International Court of Justice on the 16th of March, 2022, in the case of Ukraine against Russia. This is an order to Russia to immediately suspend military operations in Ukrainian territory. We recall that the provisional measures are binding for the parties according to the statutes of the court. We lament that Russia has not applied any of these measures thus far. This condemned Russian aggression against Ukraine in the most energetic terms moves towards making an appeal for Russia to withdraw its troops. We are committed with international order based on the pillars in international law, and including in the United Nations Charter. As a response to the continued Russian aggression against Ukraine, we are willing to take a decision and adopt additional sanctions. Also, there's the message of profound solidarity that we have with the Ukrainian people against this unprovoked aggression. Thank you very much.
I now offer the floor to Ambassador Ronald Sanders, the permanent representative of Antigua and Barbuda. Excellency, you have the floor.
The Ukraine is asking for the floor, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Sir Ron, I beg your forbearance as I offer the floor to the Ambassador of the Ukraine. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Hello, do you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. I apologize because the ambassador of Ukraine is on the meeting now. So I would like, I'm the alternative observer of Ukraine. And I would like to briefly react to the words of Russian representative because it's all utter gibberish. They are speaking about Russian narratives and doing disinformation and propaganda because they are professionals in this issue. Because Ukraine doesn't elaborate and we don't have any biological weapons. Where Russia is using negotiations only to extend their time for their war. And look, if you see yesterday's vote in the General Assembly, only 5 states, including Russia, voted with Russia. So all the civilized world now is with Ukraine. We are united. And we are grateful for the Organization of American States and its members for today's resolutions. And Russia is only can only kill innocent civilians and children. They are not going to negotiate in a good faith. Sorry, I'm a little bit emotional today, but this is what I wanted to say. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I now offer the floor to His Excellency Sir Ronald Sanders. Excellency, you have the floor.
Ambassador, excuse me, Madam Chair, sorry to interrupt you. The SG had asked for the floor and Sir Ron asked to speak at the very end.
Thank you for reminding me of that. Secretary General, I beg for your apologies. I apologize.
Don't worry at all.
Secretary General, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much. Saludamos la resolución que se acaba de aprobar.
We welcome the resolution that has just been approved as an important contribution to international or American law and is part of the doctrine to abide by jus cogens for international and American ways and mores. This is the fundamental basis. It's crucial for maintaining international peace. Peace in Europe, peace in the world can never be a topic that is foreign to the OAS. As has been pointed out, Poland was a European topic, but this is a European topic in European hands, but these are not just European issues. Russia should stop its war of aggression. This is the path to peace. We salute the commitment of member states with the main issues on global international agenda, and we look at the humanitarian dimensions of this as a way to protecting human rights, which are included in the resolution, looking at a peaceful way, abiding by international principles. The region cannot be far afield of this. We have to stick to the same tack in the vanguard of international law, as well as being coherent with this organization, as has been pointed out by the observers. All of these principles and foundations have to be looked at. Ukraine continues to suffer. Ukrainian people continue to suffer. Children, men and women. We, in this regard, salute the Ukrainian people who are involved. The war, this is a violation of international law and the international community. It gravely affects international relations. We have to defend the principles of international law within the inter-American system. Aggression is something from the past in the world and on this continent. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
Secretary General, and once again, I ask you to forgive me. Ambassador Sanders, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, before I proceed, let me say that my delegation endorses entirely the statement just made by Secretary General Luis Almagro, upholding the principles of this Organization of American States. Thank you for the opportunity to once again thank the delegations that joined Antigua and Barbuda and Guatemala in co-sponsoring this resolution now adopted by the Permanent Council. We thank all the 28 delegations that upheld the principles of the OAS Charter and the authority of the Permanent Council to raise its voice on international issues that are of such an egregious nature that they threaten the well-being of all states, including the members of the OAS. We also thank the permanent observers that spoke here in encouragement of our resolution. Madam Chair, my delegation accepts the sovereign rights of our member states to speak and vote in accordance with positions arising from their circumstances. In that regard, my delegation particularly is sympathetic to the explanation of its vote offered by the delegation of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We accept, therefore, the rights of the 5 countries that abstained to do so. However, in the course of the explanation of their votes, one delegation said that the language of the resolution was infelicitous and gave that as one of the reasons that caused that delegation not to support the resolution. But with all due respect, my delegation is obliged to point out that every delegation had the opportunity and the right to contribute to the language of the resolution, and all were invited to do so. If any delegation did not seize that opportunity and did not exercise its right to negotiate the resolution, it can hardly complain about the final language of the resolution. More alarmingly, Madam Chair, it was said that this Organization of American States, one of the oldest multilateral organizations in the world, has no authority to speak on a global issue, even though it is clear that that issue involving aggression against a sovereign state materially affects all our countries. In law, it is a simple fact that any affected party has a right to voice its concerns and to seek remedies at the very least. It seems that for the first time in its history, the Organization of American States is expected to be silent as world peace and security is patently and blatantly affected. But Madam Chair, silence is not an option in the face of violations of international law and of grave humanitarian crisis. Silence is certainly not an option for the OAS, especially as the two countries involved, Ukraine and the Russian Federation, enjoy observer status of our organization with responsibilities to uphold the principles and values of our charter. Madam Chair, we have acted today in the OAS after wide consultation amongst each other to uphold the values for which we collectively declare we stand. Our collective action should be applauded, and each of our countries that stood up here for international law and for peace and security deserves respect and thanks. My delegation and the delegation of Guatemala thanks them all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Sir Ron. There being no further requests for the floor, we have concluded the order of business for this special meeting. Today's comments will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. I thank all of you for your participation. This meeting is adjourned.